when thinking about creating an equity action plan, I want to think about all the different communities, but I want to focus on three because although there are many and I will eventually focus on all, I think focusing on three specifically because having too much of a workload can sometimes seem like a difficult or an arduous task. So I'm going to just focus on the three that I find to me are the most pertinent or the ones that I need to focus on myself. So, looking at the Ontario Equity Inclusive Strategy, they had three goals and standards that they wanted to achieve with the actual plan. And I want to relate each of those to a different community that I think I would like to focus on. So the first one is the queer community, and it was based on the first um, goal that the Equity and Inclusive Strategy Plan had, which was high levels of student achievement. And the reason why I picked that is because even in the document, there was a point where it said the Ontario Conference of Catholic Bishops noted higher rates of suicide in homosexuals. And they even stated in the document that we know that when students see themselves reflected in their studies, they are more likely to stay engaged and find school relevant, which is in line with what was read about in the Snap article regarding students doing better in high school when they had LGBT plus added into the curriculum and how they felt more engaged because without that actual representation they felt distant and they felt that they couldn't actually that school or society wasn't really meant for them, and so the learning was lessened. And I also want to take a look at that kind of stuff because with my focus on resources and trying to find different things to make my own learning in these communities more intense. I look at the Carr article, which stated that we need to seek outside sources. And one of the things I feel like I'm lacking as a community is the queer community. Um, I had my own upbringing and it was more traditional. And so I didn't get to learn a lot about it, not to mention the fact that the media doesn't portray it well enough. So I feel like I can do more to learn about that stuff. And I kind of also got to thinking about that because I was listening to a podcast by Malcolm Gladwell called The Revisionist History, and he talks about a painting by a woman who was at a time when art was considered a male profession, who created a piece of art that was so good that there was so much praise behind it, but then her art afterwards was considered panned, and it made her feel like she wasn't meant to be an artist when she had so much skill. And it talks about how there's something called moral licensing, where we think that if we open the door just a little bit, we think, oh, we've done a good job, and look how progressive we are, and then we just kind of stop doing what we're doing. And it reminds me of again the Snap article where the teachers were like, oh, like I did this little bit, and that's enough, rather than being like, you have to keep doing it all the time. And some teachers who didn't even take the step at all. So those are things I kind of think about why I want to think about that first issue of the queer community. The second one is poverty and mental health, and it's based on the second goal that the inclusive strategy mentions, which is reduced gaps in student achievement. And I think poverty and mental health produce the biggest gaps that we have. Specifically, the Ontario Equity Inclusive Strategy says that rejection, exclusion, and estrangement are associated with behavior problems in the classroom, lower interest in school, lower student achievement, and higher dropout rates. And nothing rejects students more than having something that makes them different. And mental health and poverty are by far some of the biggest contributors to that. um, Looking at the Way article, there's a quote that says the focus has been on the mental health has been the focus on mental health has been on physical health and the delivery of programs designed to enhance healthy eating habits, encourage physical activities, prevent tobacco and substance use, and promote sexual health. However, mental health is an essential component of general health and well-being has been largely absent from the national education agenda, which is true. We don't really do a good job of teaching mental health. So, on top of the fact that these are some of the ways that we increase the gaps between learning, we also aren't doing a good job to prevent it. And the Francu article also mentions how the test scores of kids who are in poverty there's a huge gap. Not to mention the fact that when we test for these things, we kind of forget that hey, some of these kids who are impoverished, their learning has suffered so far that when by the time we test them, they're either out, they're in lower grades, or something worse. And so we kind of just don't even include those numbers, and we don't even realize that the gap is that much larger. And for me, I am hugely passionate about mental health, but I think poverty is so tied in that we have to do. Such a big task. I think a huge focus should be placed upon it, and that's what I want. Why I want to focus on it. And not to mention that, again, another podcast by the Revisionist History was about education, and it was specifically focused in America, but I think it provides a lot of insight, which was that Harvard tried to become more equitable, and they tried to allow more students in poverty to attend and give them chances to attend. And the year after they did that, they only had 15 more students, and the administrators thought, oh well, we put so much work into this, and we only got 15, so I guess there aren't that many smart kids who are impoverished, which is not the case, because there was in the podcast they mentioned how there was a study done, and it found that 35,000 kids scored in the 90th percentile living under 40K a year. So those kids are out there, and we aren't doing a good enough job of grabbing them. So there are all these statistics, and I feel like we have to make such a huge focus on that issue alone. And the third and final issue for me is multiculturalism, based on the third goal, which is increased public confidence and publicly funded education. And so the reason why I think that is because there are some articles that we read and discussion that we've had about how when we exclude cultures, they are less likely to be a part of education, and they lose confidence in education. So even the inclusive strategy says that, in fact, the Supreme Court of Canada in 2005 acknowledged that racial prejudice against visible minorities is so notorious and indisputable that its existence needs to be treated as a social fact. We need to understand that this is now such a huge problem. And for me, I come from a very, you know, like Caucasian background. I had diversity in my classes, but not a lot, and I feel like I could have done more, and I could do more right now to learn about these cultures, and I'm trying to do that slowly. But again, there are so many cultures, and it's not that I feel like this is too big of a task. It's going to take some time to chip away at it. And in the Russ Paquette article, there's a quote that she says, individuals or groups are not inherently marginal or deviant. They are socially constructed as such within a specific context in opposition to norms prescribed by the dominant social discourse. I think this is an important point to make, because a lot of people think that certain cultures have certain tendencies, which is not the case. They create biases and stereotypes, and we need to remember those things. I think that's a huge thing. It's a huge part of um, equity and inclusivity that we have to fight for or fight against, so that we can get more equity and inclusivity. And even in the one of the ideas that I really liked was the Matas article, saying how they wanted more multicultural, like cultures wanted more teachers and principals and stuff, administrators, being more of a diverse society, because it seemed to be more monolithic. And I really like the idea of having language courses. I like that idea of offering more language courses, because I've done a lot of thinking about my own language, my own not heritage, which is Serbian, because there are certain things, good things and bad things. Like one bad thing is that the word for a gypsy is the same word that we use for somebody who's from India, which I think is like inherently racist, and that's a problem. And then also on the same fact, I really like the word plava, which means blue, but we can also call somebody blue haired, because that's usually referring to somebody we can call someone blonde blue haired, because historically, anytime we saw somebody with blue eyes and blonde hair, they had blue eyes because they were usually typically Scandinavian. And so, stuff like that, I think it's like, I want to find more of that interesting topic, because I like those facts. I feel like any kid at any age would really like to enjoy that, and it provides a lot of insight into the culture. And I also remember reading an article about how it's important to have representation and be aware of experiences, because I remember there's somebody in the U.S. And he is African American, and he actually goes to different members of the KKK and talks to them one on one, and he says that he's converted about 200 different members away from the KKK just by sitting down and talking to them. And if that's not an endorsement of just having more of a discussion and allowing the ignorance and fear to go away, then I don't know what is. So with those three issues in mind, let me examine the forms of resistance that I might have. So as far as students go, I'm a huge believer that students will not have much resistance, as it were, especially the younger they are, because I think a lot of kids are naturally empathetic, and we just kind of ruin them through different societal um, barriers and obstacles and things that they grow up around. So as long as I have an environment that's inclusive, I don't expect much. I think kids are a lot more willing to learn than we realize. I remember in my grade six class when I talked about Attawapiskat and how terrible the living conditions were, and I showed a video from CBC about how the suicide rates had skyrocketed for kids their age. There was a huge discussion about suicide and why somebody can't just leave Attawapiskat. Why can't they just do that? Because these kids didn't understand that notion of why you can't just leave, and it was a huge teachable moment to talk about that kind of stuff, and they were all much better for it. Um, Parents, that's difficult because biases leak into their kids, and they have a huge concern about what their kids are learning. So I think that's one thing I should anticipate. But I think if I'm open with the parents, it should work out. As far as administrators and teachers go, I don't really think that should be a huge problem. We are pushing for equity. Administrators should be backing me up, and if they don't, I have policies to follow behind on me. And for other teachers go, if administrators are good and they follow the equity plan, then I don't have to worry about other teachers because I have the backing of the principal and other people behind me. Time and energy, it's going to take a lot. It's a lot of sacrifice to kind of keep to want to change the way you want to be inclusive and diverse, finding these different ways to change your own thinking and stuff like that. That takes a lot of sacrifice and time. And for a lot of people, yeah, they don't want to give it. And I can't really blame them. Being a teacher is a huge sacrifice. But for me personally, I want to be a teacher as best as I can for all my students in every way possible. So I think I can find ways to give more time and energy. And as far as resources go, man, there's so many. You just got to look. When I wanted to find out more about women and their forgotten voices, all I had to do was look online, or I just went to Goodreads and I found if I when I found one book, I found five more. I found people to follow on Twitter. I found things to find out like different social media aspects. Like it is honestly the easiest way. Resources I don't provide. I don't think there's any form of resistance when it comes to that. And when it comes to offering a plan for addressing these issues, I feel, again, I can find so many, but off the top of my head, I can think of like a suggestion box. If students want to tell me, hey, can we talk about this? Or I think you forgot to talk about this, or, just having different ways that for them to contribute. I was also really like the idea of a wonder wall. Like after we're done a certain topic, kids can ask, hey, what about this? I wonder about this, or how about we go in this avenue of questioning, and I really enjoy that too. I also found that for some kids, when I show them that I'm passionate about knowledge, there comes a point where they kind of want to beat me, where they want to find more information, where they want to kind of figure out a way to best my brain. So I think having that ability, we're saying like, hey, can you find information where you beat the teacher, or can you find out some ways where I was wrong? There's a program on TSN called Pardon the Interruption, and where at the end they go over like here are the things that they did wrong, that they got wrong, and I feel like kind of adapting that for the classroom, like here are the ways that the teacher could have presented that better, or having them critique me, because I think like for all the assessment that teachers give to students, there's not much for the student to give for the teacher, and I think it should be a two-way street like that. um I feel like allowing the community to be involved in my classroom is a big thing too. Allowing parents to come in, sharing their stories, different people coming in to share different professions and stuff like that. Giving them more of a representation, seeing that our community is built of much more than they realize. I also think giving them ways to critique media is hugely important. Pop culture and media are a huge part of their lives. So having TV shows or movies coming in and thinking about these things. Like for me personally, I just recently watched Spider-Man Homecoming and I thought, wow, this is way more of a diverse cast than I've seen in previous movies this year. And I thought like this should be what it is. Like I want to see more of this. And I think having them understanding, having kids critique stuff like that is very important to let them understand that we should be trying to strive for more of a change. And we analyze books like that in language classes, like for book reports and stuff like that, but not much for anything else. And I think that's important. Like we should be looking at different commercials and stuff like that, like questioning the media for what it's trying to present and if we're going in the right direction. So thinking about all that, what is my equity action plan? Well, I think for me, it's the three most important steps in my equity action plan are: number one, identify student profiles and possible profiles that I might have in the future and be ready to have resources available. So this is my preemptive way of preparing. And also keeping myself up to date. I always thought that it was, doctors are mandated to keep up with the research, but not many other professions do that. And I think it's important that teachers actually do that. It's good for our reflection, and I want to keep up with that kind of stuff. And on top of that, we have to keep up to date with different resources. So, I can find out what my class is going to be like for the next year and see if I can make student profiles and have resources. But I always find that teachers always have these binders online or in paper of all the different ways that they can teach a grade or all the different ways they can teach a subject, but I have yet to see a binder on equity and inclusivity. Like, here are the different things I can use, different assessments I can use for somebody from this culture, or lesson plans based on this culture, or assessments based on somebody who has some sort of uh, physical diversibility, like just different things like that. Like, why don't we have binders like that? I want to create one for myself. I want to have these at the ready. And anytime I find one, to kind of create this binder to put in. And I think that's impactful for me because I'm at the ready for my students' needs. And in the short term, it's going to be hard. I'm going to have limited resources. I'm not going to have all the things that I need, but by the end, I'll have such a huge resource that I can always just pass it off. If somebody, one of my fellow teachers, has difficulty with a student with a specific need, I can have this resource to share. And I think that's hugely important. I think more teachers need to be willing to share that kind of stuff. The second goal in my equity action plan is to create an environment of sharing, validation, comfort, and success. And how I'd like to do that is to always have that first week of school, first 2 weeks, just having that kind of tribes combination, just having an open environment where people are allowed to share. We talk about how we're going to have open discourse. I feel like a lot of the time we aren't teaching kids about how to like properly communicate with each other, which is a huge problem. Like, whenever I try and get into a discourse with people, they get so riled up and angry, and it's just like, hang on a second, like we're not attacking each other as people. I think the rule of the ad hominem rule, like attack the idea, not the person, that's such a huge important part of communication, and like any sort of logic, the fact that we don't teach enough on it is, to me, surprising. Like, we should be teaching kids how to talk to each other, and kind of just creating that environment, having those opportunities for them to share. I feel like, having at the beginning of the day where we just kind of share, and we're, hey, did we see anything cool last night or something like that, and talking about it, like just having a moment where we can actually be at class instead of just immediately rolling into a lesson. And I think the impact there is that students kind of feel more comfortable. They get more engaged. They get to share who they are and get to represent themselves. And in the long term, it kind of builds up. Like, it's a way to build up self-esteem and understanding, and being like, oh, I can succeed, whereas before I might not have. And I think just allowing students to open up like that, like that's an idea I want to have for in the classroom, like when I have the students. And for my third part of my equity action plan is to allow for a two-way street with students, to let them educate me and allow myself to be wrong and to be humble. So a lot of the time we're trying to focus on, the student and what we can do for the student, but we also have to remember, what can the student do for us? The impact here is that, we're learning just as much as we can from the student, and I'm trying to get as much as I can from. And uh, a lot of time we ask ourselves, how can I help a student with this need, or how can I make sure I include this community? Well, why are you doing that? Well, you're doing it for a specific student or specific students. Who better to ask than the student themselves? They can teach you. They have all these resources. I remember hearing about call and response uh, based on the article that we read about Gay, and I remember reading about that, and I remember because I learned about Music 101 in university, and we talked about call and response being a big part of um, the African culture in music, and we still hear it today. And I remember hearing that, but I didn't know about the other cultures that do that too, and what the different ways that they call it. And I think having understanding that, like learning that kind of stuff from different students, is so powerful and so informative. Like that's knowledge that I will hold for the rest of my life and know about. And so having this opportunity for students to know, like, hey, yeah, I'm going to be trying to guiding your learning, but you have the opportunity to teach me some stuff too. And it's kind of like that, what I mentioned before, like beat the teacher, except share with the teacher. Let's grow together. I'm not some sort of like bastion of all knowledge, and I'm like always infallible or something like that. No, like kids like it when they know that you can be wrong, and that you have the ability to learn from your mistakes, and it allows for a better classroom. And just constantly being aware of that, being patient, being humble, never losing sight of the fact that I have a lot of power when I'm the teacher, and that I have this voice, and I should be understanding that it should be a power that I hold carefully. Because one of my teachers in teachers college now just said, for some students, the only voice that they'll ever have is the teacher, and I need to be wary of that, because you know I should not squander that privilege that I'm given by the student. I have to represent them as best as I can. These are my students, and they trust me, and I should not let that go away. Because in the short term, trust is a difficult thing to have, but in the long term, I can change a student's life by even the smallest little bit that I can give, by showing them that there's a respect here, that we can learn from each other. And I think for me, that's my equity action plan. It's going to be something that I'm constantly changing, and I hope that I never consider myself satisfied in the work that I do, and I'm always striving to be better.